If you live near a major road or highway, a new study says you're likely breathing in a number of harmful pollutants that can have a serious impact on your health. The study was conducted by the University of Toronto. Researchers found that 80% of nitrogen monoxide and 60% of black carbon came from local traffic. Those and other harmful particulates are responsible for 7,700 premature deaths in Canada each year. The study was conducted in Toronto and Vancouver over 2 years. The study was led by Greg Evans. He is the director of the Southern Ontario Centre for Atmospheric Aerosol Research at the University of Toronto, and he joins us now. So thank you very much.
Wonderful to be here. It's a real pleasure.
Here. So you say that the levels, when you did this study, that they actually surprised you. Why is that?
They surprised us in a number of ways. We knew from the start of the study that living near a major roadway was a potential hazard to people's health. And we knew that about a third of Canadians live near major roadways. But we wanted to understand what that really means. And so what we did is we measured the pollution levels beside the roadways and compared it to places well away from when there are any vehicles. And that's where those numbers that you quoted, that a lot of the pollution really is coming from the vehicles on those local roads.
And so tell us about that, because right, there are several European countries that they've started banning older diesel vehicles, right? And is this part of the problem? It's in some of these badly maintained vehicles?
That's the big opportunity. I see it more as the opportunity than the problem. And you mentioned there is something called black carbon, which is a pollutant that people can see when a truck starts up, for example. It's a lot of soot that comes out. And that's an indicator of exposure to a diesel exhaust. And so what we did is we measured the black carbon levels to get an idea of how much exposure to diesel exhaust was occurring. And we were surprised at how high it was, particularly near roads where there's a lot of these older trucks or trucks that potentially have had their emission treatment systems tampered with.
And I understand from, even if you're not right next to the roadway, but even 150 meters away, you can still be affected?
That's right. So that's part of other work that we have done, and we did some more work on that, is how far away do you need to be? And what we found is that you need to be about 250 meters away from a roadway before the pollution levels drop down to what they would be if there were no vehicles on that roadway. And in cities like Vancouver and Toronto, it's very hard to live 250 meters away from a major roadway because we have roadways throughout our cities.
And winter can also be tough.
And winter.
Tell us about that.
And winter really is the Canadian story. So we did our work in Toronto and Vancouver, and I've lived in Manitoba, so I know that Toronto and Vancouver are not really winter, but it does get cold. And what we found is that the emissions shot up when it got colder, and particularly the emissions of nitrogen oxides. And that told us that these emission treatment systems that we have really are not working well as they should under the cold winter climate that we have in our country.
So is there a solution to that? Is there something that can be done about that?
Well, there's lots of things that can be done about it. I think that's, again, it's a good news story. I don't want to overly worry people, but first of all, if we do target these older vehicles and we have enforcement and we get them off the road, or we get them repaired, or we relocate them to places where we don't have our schools and our playgrounds, then that's one part of the solution as well.
So I understand that it's not just it's the trucks, it's the growing popularity of SUVs, and it's pickup trucks as well, right?
That's right. That's a different part of the story. So we made measurements, we measured a lot of metals, and we found that concentrations of some metals increased during morning rush hour. And so that told us that this is something to do with the traffic. And we wondered where they came from, and we saw that the ratio of the metals and the metals that we found were very much related to brakes and to tire wear. And what we looked at is then we went back and looked at what's gone on the last 10 years, and we found that the level of what we called non-tailpipe emissions, so emissions coming from vehicles, but not from the engine, but from the other parts of the vehicles, have really increased in the last 5 years or so. And that's linked to people buying bigger cars.
So what kind of consumer behavior do you think needs to be addressed when it comes to all of this?
Well, some people do need pickup trucks for work. Some people have large families, do need SUVs, but it can't be that all Canadians need pickup trucks and SUVs. So I think it's really that people should buy the size of vehicle that really meets their needs, or if they can, cycle, walk, use public transit, or just use an electric car like myself.
And what other recommendations would you have for policymakers?
I think for policymakers, it's all three levels of government. So this is one of the joys of this study, is that we were working with the municipal level, the provincial level, and the federal level, and that let the study happen. And it's going to have all those three levels of government together to solve the problem. So where trucks can go in cities, that's a municipal issue. Where we put schools, that's municipal. How we enforce emissions and how we do the verification, that's provincial. And the design of emissions and fuel composition, for example, that's a federal level issue. So really there's an opportunity for all three levels of government to work together. And I think they're all interested. So I think it's an opportunity to make some real progress. We just may need to nudge them a bit.
Was there anything else in this study that you think people should know about?
I think it's the idea that we can all play a role in that. And so I did mention the idea that, yes, we can use active transportation, we can maintain our own vehicles when we need to, but also the idea that we can report these heavy emitting vehicles when we see them. So if you are living near a major roadway, there's ways that you can report these heavy trucks that are putting out a lot of soot, and you can see it when they start up. And if they put out a lot of soot for over 5 seconds, then that means that that's potentially a heavy emitting vehicle. So we could all report those in and help the enforcement branch find these culprits and get them off the road.
All right, Greg, thank you. Greg Evans is the director of the Southern Ontario Centre for Atmospheric Aerosol Research at the University of Toronto.